In this video, I'm going to conduct the analyses to help determine whether I can interpret the statistically significant main effect associated with the within subjects factor. For thoroughness, I'm also going to look at the between subjects main effect, which wasn't significant. I'm still going to carry out the analyses to help you in a future study where it might be useful to you. So in this case here, we have a omnibus main effect associated with the within subjects factor time that was statistically significant if you look at the Hunfeld adjusted p-value of 0.001. This is on the basis of the 2x3 mixed design ANOVA, including all of the means in the analysis. So if we look at the estimated marginal means associated with the within subjects factor, the significant main effect that I just described is suggesting that these three means, 40.27, 27.58, and 30.57, are not equal to each other within sampling variability. So if I collapsed this mean here into one mean, that's where I would get 40.27. And if I collapse these two means together, the two groups, into one mean at post-test, that's where I would get this mean. And then finally, these two means collapsed equal 30.57. The ANOVA is saying that these means are not statistically significantly equal. There's a difference somewhere. Now, to find out which means are statistically significantly different from each other, you would have to ask for the post hoc tests. And I didn't do that. So let me show you how to do that. Analyze, general linear model, repeated measures, define, click on estimated marginal means if you have that button available, click compare main effects. And I'm just going to keep LSD, Fisher's LSD, because I only have 3 levels, so it should be protected. Click continue. If you can't see the estimated marginal means button, click on options and you'll see the same window at the top of this window that will allow you to specify this same information here. So when I click OK, SPSS is going to rerun the analysis exactly as it did previously, but it's also going to include the within subjects main effect post hoc tests. And so now it's comparing mean 40.27 versus 27.58. 1 versus 2 is statistically significant. And then the difference between 1 and 3, 40.27 versus 30.57, is also statistically significant. However, the last comparison, 2 versus 3, 27 versus 30, is not statistically significant, p equal 0.337. Now, you can't make the claim that there was a statistically significant reduction in anxiety from pre-test to follow-up as a main effect because, well, it's obvious there's a significant interaction here. And because there's a significant interaction, I have to conduct the simple main effect analyses in order to determine that the means are dropping for both the CBT and discussion groups in the same direction and in a way that's statistically significant. So to do that, I can do a series of 2 one-way within subjects ANOVAs, one for the discussion group and one for the CBT group. And if they're both statistically significant in the same direction, then I could interpret the significant differences that I found in these post hoc multiple comparisons. So one way to do that is to go into data and split the file, and I want to split the file across groups. So make sure you've got group and the groups based on and compare groups selected. Click OK. And now I just want to run repeated measures ANOVAs, just one way within subjects ANOVAs, one for each group. So I'm going to take group out and only have the 3 levels here. And then click OK. And if we go down to the tests of within subjects effects, these are just ordinary one-way within subjects ANOVAs. I can find that the CBT group found a statistically significant effect, F equals 14.593 and P less than 0.001. And so the means for CBT are going downwardly and they are not all equal to each other. I'd have to look at the post hoc test to see if they're all significantly different from each other, or I could do a trend analysis as well. Here's the test of within subjects contrast, and the linear time effect is observed to be statistically significant. The quadratic effect is also found to be significant, so there's one bend in the pattern of the means. So what it's finding is that it's a quadratic effect. So it's not purely linear, is it? There's a drop, and then it kind of stays flat. Now, the challenge with interpreting the omnibus main effect associated with the within subjects factor is that when I've isolated the one-way within subjects ANOVA just for discussion group, it was not statistically significant. So here's discussion, tests of within subjects effects, just for the discussion group, time, and it was not statistically significant. Whether you look at the sphericity assumed or the Hunfeld adjusted, it's not statistically significant. I didn't actually look at sphericity. It was okay for CBT, but for discussion it was violated, so I would have to look at Hunfeld. Either way, it's not statistically significant. None of the means associated with the discussion group were statistically significantly different from each other. So I can't interpret the one-way within subjects main effect identified as significant in a 2x3 because it's only the CBT group that's carrying the weight of the effect. And not only that, it's really just happening from pre-test to post-test. So to the question of are anxiety levels changing across time, you would answer yes, but it depends on what group you're looking at, CBT, and at what time period, pre-test to post-test only. So that is a very compromised main effect. In light of these results, I cannot interpret the one-way within subjects main effect that was identified as statistically significant in the 2x3 mixed design ANOVA, and that's because not both of the one-way ANOVAs were significant for both groups, CBT and discussion. It was only observed to be significant for the CBT group. They also have to be in the same direction. Hypothetically, you could see the CBT group means going downward and discussion group anxiety level means going upward, and they could both be significant. You would not interpret the one-way within subjects main effect if it were significant in the 2x3 in that case either. So they have to be statistically significant, and the pattern of the means has to be going in the same direction for both groups, or 3 groups, or 4 groups, however many groups you've got. Now thinking about the between subjects main effect, in the original 2x3 ANOVA, it was not statistically significant. So this is me going back to the 2x3, and we can see that the between subjects main effect was not statistically significant, and that was on the basis of the 31.70 versus 33.91 means. So what that would look like is if I collapsed all the levels together, pre-test, post-test, and follow-up, and got an average of that for discussion, and got an average for CBT, pre-test, post-test, and follow-up, is there a difference between the two groups collapsing across the 3 levels? You wouldn't expect it to be different in this sort of study, and ultimately you wouldn't want to be able to interpret the main effect, even though the between subjects ANOVA was not statistically significant for the omnibus main effect. If it were statistically significant, you would have to follow up with a series of isolated independent sample t-tests across each level of the within subjects factor, and you'd have to observe them to be statistically significant and in the same direction. Obviously that's not going to happen here because there's a disordinal interaction from pre-test to post-test, so it's impossible for CBT to be higher than discussion or discussion to be higher than CBT across all levels. It's obviously crisscrossing, so it's impossible. But you can have data where it is possible. You might find that one group is higher than the other group consistently across all levels of the other within subjects factor. And an efficient way to test that for statistical significance would be to just conduct a series of either independent sample t-tests or one-way between subjects ANOVAs. In the textbook, I did a series of 3 one-way between subjects ANOVAs. So let's do that. I got to unsplit my file, and then I can do compare means one-way ANOVAs, and I'm going to do them for pre-treatment, post-treatment, and follow-up, grouping variable in there, options. I could look at the descriptive statistics. I could do the homogeneity of variance test, which would be necessary in this case, and then click OK. And what we find is that none of the differences between the means are statistically significant. So when I compare these two means, they are not statistically significantly different from each other. Now, in this sort of study, you wouldn't want them to be statistically significantly different from each other because you're allocating people randomly or semi-randomly to treatment groups, right? You don't want to see a difference here. If anything, Weatherall et al. Would be a bit disappointed that they actually saw some numerical difference at all. Fortunately, it's not statistically significant, but this difference is also not statistically significant on the basis of this F test, post-treatment, F 1.57, P equal 0.219. And this difference is also not statistically significant. F equal 0.599, P equal 0.44. So none of the differences are statistically significant. Now, I mentioned in the textbook that Weatherall et al. Would be a little bit concerned, I think, that this difference was not statistically significant. So at post-test, the participants in the CPT group's anxiety levels was not statistically significantly lower than the discussion group anxiety level mean. Ideally, this would be statistically significant. It's not necessary to observe it as significant because the interaction is ultimately the firmest evidence to suggest that the treatment is possibly efficacious. The problem is that the discussion group was a bit lower to begin with, and so they didn't have as far to go with respect to reducing their anxiety levels, whereas the CBT group was already kind of high. They were higher than, it wasn't statistically significantly higher, true, but still a bit higher. And so they had more ways to come down than the discussion group. So that's just a little nuance in their data that would be a little bit problematic, and a reviewer of this work might point that out. There's not really anything you can do about it, but you'd probably highlight it as a limitation in your study in the discussion, suggesting that yes, it wasn't significantly different, but there was a numerical difference, and it was in favor of CBT, evidencing a more substantial drop from pre-test to post-test because they were higher to begin with. So that is how you can do a series of follow-up simple main effect analyses in order to evaluate the possibility of interpreting an omnibus main effect.